field that is being used as a replacement for animal therapy in nursing homes, which is really kind of awesome.
So she builds planets on Earth, you guys.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Reno Family Foundation Symposium, From Green to Red, an environmental protest from Beady Wolf. I'm James Monroe. I'm the producer of adult programs and theater experiences here at the Museum of Science Boston, and I am so excited to be introducing our special guest this evening, and also to be welcoming for the first time since March 2020, a live in-person audience for one of our adult programs here to the Museum of Science. Yes. We are joined in Connors Theater by a limited yet enthusiastic live audience. It's just wonderful to have you all here and feel your energy. We are also live streaming tonight's program to a virtual audience who are watching with us on YouTube. So a huge hello and thank you to everyone out there watching digitally. Tonight we are joined by artist and musician Beady Wolf, who is here to talk all about her incredible work, including her groundbreaking installation From Green to Red, which first popped up on my radar when she did a preview of it at the Nobel Prize Summit earlier this year. And she is joined tonight in conversation by climate reporter for the Boston Globe, Sabrina Shankman, and together they have a really important conversation in store for all of us. I can't wait to bring them out here. And tonight is just the start of our current fall subspace season of adult programming. We have an incredible lineup of events and experiences both on-site here at the museum and virtually live streamed every week now through December. So I encourage you to check out our website at mos.org/adults and sign up for our mailing list so you can join us all fall long. Now, if you want to learn more about Beady and Sabrina, you can do so by checking out our virtual program for tonight. For those of you on site, if you have not done so already, when you leave the theater tonight, there's signage that you can scan the QR code on your phone to access that. And everyone watching virtually, you should be able to scan the QR code that will pop up on your screen all throughout the evening. And a little bit later on, Beady and Sabrina will take some of your questions. So if you have a question for them at any time, you can submit those by going to slido.com and entering the code Beady Wolf, all one word, just as it appears on the screen above me and on your screen at home. Once again, that's slido.com with the code Beady Wolf. And I need to thank our dear friends Jack and Susie Reno and everyone at the Reno Family Foundation Fund for making tonight's program possible. And thank you for your ongoing support of the adult programming here at the museum. This symposium is always one of our favorites every season to produce, so a huge thank you to Jack and Susie. But now it is my pleasure to welcome to the stage our special guest tonight, Beady Wolf, in conversation with Sabrina Shankman.
I'm Beatie Wolfe. I'm a musician, a songwriter, and I love to create tangible formats for my albums. When I was about 7 or 8, I discovered my parents' record collection. I just saw opening these records up as kind of like entering into the worlds of these albums, and that was the gateway into this world. I just couldn't accept that my albums wouldn't have these worlds. Instead, they would just be these kind of intangible experiences floating around somewhere. And so I was just determined to create a tangible album, but for this digital age.
This was the first innovation, and the idea with this was to kind of turn your phone into a magic box, like the sort of 80s viewfinder.
You know, raw space, I haven't talked about how it worked in terms of the experience of the actual anti-stream, so I could mention that. And then the space broadcast.
Yes, please tell.
Oh God. Oh man, it's like, give me the energy.
Giant antennas, like monstrous eyes and ears, straining, watching.
Like, how do you then create something that triggers a different pathway, you know, kind of being a kid and excited about uncovering this thing? And that's what I'm always trying to do with these vinyl experiences. If we were still as excited about albums as I was when I was 8, I wouldn't be doing any of the tech stuff. I want people to remember why they love music and realize that they can still have that with music today. You know, I believe we have to keep the bar high. We have to keep on making the best art possible.
My fingers are so cold. Oh my God.
All right, welcome everybody. Thank you, James, for the introduction. And as James mentioned, my name is Sabrina Shankman, and I'm so delighted to be here tonight. I've spent much of the last decade reporting on climate change, first for Inside Climate News and more recently at the Boston Globe. One of the challenges of the Climate Beat is taking the science that underlies the changes happening in the world around us and translating it for a broader audience, helping our readers understand that climate change is not a concept or a theory or a conspiracy, but a fact that is defining the way that we're living our lives now and will come to do so even more in the future. Doing that work feels really crucial, especially now, because as a summer of extreme heat, deadly wildfires, and unprecedented flooding has shown us, the future we are warned about is here now, and it is going to get worse. Which is why I'm so honored to be here tonight with Beady Wolf. Beaty's most recent project, which we're here to discuss, finds a new way to underscore the urgency of the climate crisis, drawing on the long history of art as protest. She's been described as a musical weirdo and a visionary. Beaty's work transcends genres and space and time, and I'm so excited to get to talk about this latest work, From Green to Red, an environmental protest piece. Her earlier works, which we'll also touch on tonight, include a 3D theater for the palm of your hand, as we just saw a glimpse of, a wearable record jacket cut by the tailor for David Bowie and Jimi Hendrix out of fabric woven with Beaty's music, and an anti-stream from the quietest room on Earth, also known as the world's first live 360-degree augmented reality stream. Beady is also the co-founder of a profound research project looking at the power of music for people living with dementia, which she recently shared at TEDMed. This installation, From Green to Red, was previewed at the Nobel Prize Summit, followed by the premiere unveiling at the London Design Biennale. Now it's here in Boston for one night only, ahead of it being exhibited at the UN's Global Climate Summit COP26 later this fall. This is the first in-person event held by the Museum of Science since the pandemic began. Beady and I are both vaccinated and are sitting more than 6 feet apart, and everyone attending here tonight is observing strict COVID safety protocols. Later on in the evening, as James said, we'll be giving you in the audience and those of you streaming a chance to ask some questions. As he mentioned, and as you can see above me, you can submit a question by going to slido.com and entering the code Beady Wolf, all one word. But without further ado now, let's dive in. Hi, Beady.
Hey.
So to get us going, can you give us an idea, describe the From Green to Red project to the audience quickly, and then we'll cue the trailer to the project so they can see some of it for themselves?
Yeah, absolutely, Sabrina. I'd just like to say it's so wonderful to be here. It's so surreal to be here. I haven't been anywhere in 16 months, so this is definitely different, and something that was so familiar, going out and being around people and holding these events, is now bizarre, and odd. And so it's wonderful that this is going to hopefully become, more part of our daily lives again. And so thank you, James, for, putting this on, and the museum. From Green to Red really began 15 years ago after seeing An Inconvenient Truth and going to the cinema. I was a teenager at the time, and I was just so angry. I didn't know what we were about to watch to that kind of extent. And I left the cinema, and I just felt like, well, everyone has to see this, and this is the most relevant thing in the world. And obviously at that point, it was not even new information. It was information that had been around, since the 70s. Or even earlier. And I wrote a song called From Green to Red directly after that, cinema screening. And then I thought, well, I don't need to record this because everyone's going to see this film, and then it will be irrelevant. What I'm concerned about will be irrelevant, and we'll be on a totally different path, in 5 to 10 years' time. And obviously that didn't happen. So that song became part of the second album, which was this
reimagining of the album jacket. And Sabrina, you described it in your intro. It was sort of looking at the record jacket in a different way, and it was woven into literally this jacket, which I would wear. So there was a nice aspect to that because it was woven and it was this threaded piece. So a couple of years ago, I was giving a talk about my work at JPL, and at the end of that, we were sort of discussing various aspects of it. And one of the chief engineers for NASA, a man called Dr. Randy Wesson, pulled up these 800,000 years of atmospheric CO2 data and showed it to me. And it was really like that same what the hell moment I had in the cinema, but 15 years later. And I just realized we've not got anywhere. We've not really, if anything, it's just accelerated. And at that point, I felt like, well, how can this data be something that everyone can absorb, from a kid to a grandparent to whatever field they're in, whether they know, whether they think of themselves as being science-minded or not. This is something that people can walk in and in 10 seconds hopefully get a sense of this is where we are. And it can be done in an evocative way where people really can relate to it, and it will open their mind, but hopefully it will open their heart as well. And so that was really the idea behind creating From Green to Red, the installation, and taking that 800,000 years of climate data and weaving it into a live dynamic timeline of our planet and human impact, and obviously using the song as the kind of backtrack or the backing track for that. And yeah, I think we're going to have a look at the trailer for it, but then it was just installed at the London Design Biennale, and there people could interact with it, so they could move their hand over the fabric and pull out the exact data, the specific ppm, carbon ppm, and get the planetary timeline for that point in the fabric. So it gave people a real sense of hopefully awareness and agency.
That's great. Can we see the trailer?
Outside, the people like cars are still running, when inside it's safe to deny that it's coming. The TV's turned up, so the winds are just humming to the sound of the heat rising. We don't want to hear that the problem is us, so we live like we want in our own universe. 'Cause man thinks he's God in a devilish way. We're too proud to see what we won't even say. We don't wanna know, don't wanna know, don't wanna know, don't wanna know. No, we don't wanna know, don't wanna know, don't wanna know, don't wanna know. So take my hand, babe, and I'll walk you to school, where you'll learn how to live by a new set of rules. 'Cause we played all our cards, there's none left for you. Forgive us, my dear, can't you see? It's the truth that we don't wanna know, don't wanna know, don't wanna know, don't wanna know. No, we don't wanna know, don't wanna know, don't wanna know, don't wanna know. What happened to love? Is it out of date? Turn back, there's so much here to say. What happened to love? Is it out of date? Turn back, there's so much here to say. Turn back.
So great to see that again. So you had two awakenings that led to this project. When you came back after seeing that data, the 800,000 years of data, how did you channel that feeling of awakening into this tangible product? Obviously, you already had the song, but what was the next step after that?
Well, I spent quite a bit of time chatting with this NASA engineer just about how you can get people to see it. Because I think a big part of where disconnect occurs is people just being unable to see something or absorbing it. And the thing about awareness is once you're aware, it's very hard to become unaware, but I think it's almost impossible to activate that awareness to begin with, because a lot of the time we don't care. We just don't care. We're in our bubbles, we're in our worlds. And so I wanted to create something that was so simple, really something that felt like it was almost essentially it was a graph. I mean, that is almost just a graph visualized in a different way. But then bringing in the live dynamic aspect of it, so having it be something that every time it played, it would be alive in a way. The fabric would be moving in a different fashion, so it felt like it was dynamic. I think that was very important. With this, I worked with a visual effects company called The Mill, who are very good on the sort of, the visual side, and explained really what I wanted to create, and we worked together and came up with, this was the beta, this was just the trailer piece, and then as I mentioned, the full installation is set to the entire song, and that takes you much more in detail through the carbon sort of footprint and the planet's timeline. You can really get a sense of that kind of specific date and what was occurring. And so, yeah, I think it's about keeping it simple enough that, something I find working with, different, because all of the projects have kind of taken me into different terrain. And so, I've worked with scientists through to neuroscientists through to astrophysicists. And I think a lot of the time we can all get lost in the detail. When we know something very well, we want to communicate all of it. We want to get the nuances. We want people to really understand it. And a lot of the time, I feel like if you can make it as inclusive as possible and have it be that everyone can relate to it, that's sort of where I like to dwell. And I think wherever we can create bridges between a lot of these fields that are, most of the time are siloed. So many fields don't really interact with one another. So many people from different professions don't really interact with one another. And I think there's so much more to gain if we can kind of cross-fertilize, and create these richer experiences that, yes, they're art, yes, it's beautiful, yes, hopefully it, sounds good and all of that, but it's also conveying an important message that maybe the people with that specific knowledge and expertise are struggling to convey and communicate.
Yeah, I think this draws on this idea of art as protest. As a journalist, one of our big struggles is sometimes I'll have an incredible piece of data, and that feels like that's the whole story. But if I can't make those numbers come alive for a reader, the point gets lost. But it feels like through your work, you've found creative ways to get past that. And I'm curious, does this start with you literally putting out a graph, or when does the idea about the fabric come into play here?
It's a really impossible thing, because I don't know. Every project is so different, and it's almost like, well, what's the story? What is the intention? What is that core one-line thing you want to communicate? And then you kind of pull in whatever is going to be in service of that, and whatever is going to facilitate that. So a lot of the time it is there's a very abstract process. It's not linear at all. But it's linear in the sense of following that kind of core intention of what do you want to communicate and what is in service to that. And I think sort of going back to what we were just chatting about, and what can be such a challenge, to communicate to human beings. And what I was trying to do with this was also time, real timelines that we now are unable to see, really, because our views have got so short-termist. It's like they've kind of shrunk to a microsecond. And the idea that we have, species that have been evolving for, hundreds of millions of years and have this intelligence and this technology and this brilliance that we can learn from. I think humans are so human-centric that they're unable to see that we have the greatest technology in nature. It exists already. We can just, we really can find a lot of the answers there. And so that sense of time, and really looking like at that long now, which is something we really struggle with, I think. And it's only in the last 30, 40 years, since the digital era, the rise of the digital era, I think it's only got more and more short-termist.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So when this project came out, and looking forward into the near future even, it's had quite the reception. Can you talk a little bit, I mentioned some of it, but can you talk a little bit more about how it's been received and what your expectations had been around that work?
I had zero expectations. I think I have zero expectations for most stuff that ends up working out pretty well. And that's not from it's not because I didn't think it might be well received, but I'm always, for me, it's so much about me exploring that curiosity. I don't really even think about the reception. I hope that it will do something to kind of communicate or connect or bridge, but I'm sort of very much thinking about it from the inside out. And yeah, I just felt, I felt like there was nothing more meaningful I could work on at that point in time. That was sort of where I was at, that it was just very much that crossroads again, where obviously I wasn't a teenager anymore, and I now have I'm now out in the world, and what can I be saying? What can I be using my time and energy on? And this felt like the most vital thing. And so it was really conceived and created from that perspective. And then, the beta that we just watched, that ended up being installed just as it had come out at the Barbican, which is Europe's largest art centre, and they had commissioned a documentary about my work, and so we had it in the gallery there. And yeah, everyone was like, quite excited by it, and at that point it was just amazing that we'd even got it in time for that. And then it just seems to be this gift that keeps on giving, from a perspective of, again, really not having, thinking, oh, that's the Barbican, that was fantastic, wow, people really liked it, and, there was some great coverage of it and everything. And then it was at the Nobel Prize Summit, where I was right after Al Gore and Sir David Attenborough, which again was totally amazing, that, particularly Al Gore with the direct influence. And so I got to present it there and speak and, perform. And then it went on to the London Design Biennale, and then it will be at the Global UN Climate Summit. So it's wonderful because it's not really about me. I think there's a very narcissistic, I think the same thing that stops us seeing timelines, and really getting so micro-focused is also kind of a thing we've got just in general, which is, the personality and the ego side of humanity. And I think really being an artist, you just hope to communicate something that makes a difference or is meaningful or is a protest piece, or is doing some social good and is being of service in some capacity. So I'm just delighted because it makes me think, well, maybe it can keep making a difference, and it can kind of keep
do its part to keep the focus on this issue that is the most crucial issue we all face right now.
Yeah. I want to ask you about two words that have come up a couple times now. One, awakening, and the other being protest. It seems like, you know, this project is clearly fueled by your two awakenings around climate change. To what extent is the word protest in the title of the project, you know, a hope to inspire awakening in other people, or, you know, what does the word protest mean in there for you?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, it's activation. It's if you can activate awareness, you know, in whatever way, then that's kind of what it's about. And so the protest aspect is really, it's really that sort of shaking awake, you know, which was how I felt being in the cinema, and it was how I felt seeing the climate data. It was like someone had just shook you right up. And so I think that's the part, you know, that is the protest side of it, hoping that this can kind of shake people awake in some way.
It seems like it's been a big summer for that. Given all the events happening in the world, people are seem to be more open to being woken up to this, in my own experience. I'm curious, you know, it seems like a lot of your work that you're doing in addition to this and in the future deals with climate or the environment. How is art specifically a tool that can be used as protest when it comes to climate change and the environment? I mean, are there certain opportunities that lie in that kind of vein of storytelling that are unique?
Well, I think it's storytelling. You know, I think however we can tell stories to have people better understand something. You know, you think of kids at school in a science class, a lot of you know, what the teacher would be doing is trying to find stories or ways of that information being able to go in. And I think we've sort of lost that. You know, I think actually kids are far more in tune with a lot of stuff than we are. And so finding ways of telling stories so that they're triggering different parts of the brain, and that information can then go in because, you know, we're inspired, or we're interested, or we're curious, or we're passionate about something, and then obviously the core data or whatever it is that can seem cold then can go in a way where it really stays with us. It imprints. Something I feel very deeply is, and this in some ways is more to do with music, or initially was just to do with music, but actually I think it applies to everything. You know, when we were in that physical era, and say taking a record, you know, you had that tangible component, you had the story of the album, you had this ceremony to that whole experience. The music could go in a way where it really stayed with us. It went in deep, it imprinted, it became part of our DNA. You know, you can recall, as I'm sure I can recall, you know, being, say, 7 and opening up Abbey Road for the first time and remembering exactly how I felt and where I was in the room and, you know, what I was wearing and those sorts of things. And that side of things going in deep, you know, that's very much got disrupted in the digital age, where we're literally being bombarded all the time with, you know, information, news, music, social media, calendar alerts. Everything is hitting us at this same frequency. Nothing is going in. And we're sort of, you know, discombobulated. It's like we're supposedly taking all this stuff in, but nothing's really staying. And so I think it's about finding ways of, you know, if you move that beyond the record and you apply that to everything, sitting down and reading or going to an art gallery or whatever, it's finding the ceremony and the storytelling and that aspect of tangibility, even if it's digital. You know, obviously that was a sort of tangible weave. And that's why art is so powerful, because it is core to our humanity. It does go in incredibly deep. It can do things that nothing else
can do. And, I saw that very much during the Music Dementia Research Project, watching people who were virtually catatonic getting up and dancing to songs they'd never heard. There wasn't even a memory component that was triggering the activation, or singing along with songs that were entirely new, having previously been nonverbal. And so I think we know about as much about music in the brain as we do about the oceans or space, and I know we know a lot more about space, unfortunately, than our oceans. And I feel like it's, art is just such a great connector. So using art to be the connector during difficult times when, we need to come together more, we need to awaken. That's what I feel like it's in great service to those awakenings, and particularly when it comes to the natural world, which, along with art, is kind of the only other thing core to our humanity.
So there's a conversation that I've heard happening among journalists who report on climate change and among scientists who work on climate issues, where they can feel somewhat resentful of the fact that they're sometimes asked to provide hope to people while delivering this crucial information about what is a pretty dire thing. Personally, I don't mind it that much. I feel like there are a lot of veins that are quite hopeful in looking at the way that we are going to respond. We are responding in some ways, and then the way that we can respond if we choose to in the future. But I understand the complaint. And I'm curious, for you as an artist who's communicating around climate change, do you feel like you have some obligation, in addition to trying to awaken people, also to provide them with some hope?
Yeah, I think it's sometimes probably not in the same way, but in some ways there's actually a lot more freedom, because also, I'm an artist, but the work kind of goes into these different places, which also is sort of, confusing or delightening, if that's a word for people. So as in, I think that there's a freedom to be kind of fluid, and to be able to say things that maybe are challenging if, you've got to kind of stick to the report. I feel that aspect of giving hope is, I also feel not frustrated with that, but I kind of think I've been in situations, conferences or events where there are definitely those voices that are very much like, yeah, let's build an engine where people can go and build their utopian future and see that that's a possibility, and then they'll have that in mind and they'll change their ways. And I find that quite pretty BS, and I think you really have to, we're past the point of sort of softening and cushioning and caveating and all of that. It's like we are literally living in the beginning of the unraveling. Now, how far it unravels, that's obviously up to us. But, the tectonic plates they've been disrupted. And again, something I think we don't see is how interconnected everything is. Everything in the natural world is so interconnected. And that idea of things being, those ecosystems are in balance. When they are in balance, every individual species is also sustained. But we have a very much that mentality of, if they do well, they'll take something away from me. So we live very disconnected from that universal interconnectedness of life. And I think that, I don't know, I think we're past the point of just giving hope for hope's sake.
Yeah, I hear that. So coming back to the kind of execution of From Green to Red, one thing that I noticed as I was learning about that project and also some of your other work, is that you have this really interesting kind of melding of two different eras of technologies. So here we've got like the time-tested data collection of NASA with this like cutting-edge interactive video. And that feels like this thread that's running through a lot of your work of the old and the new together. Can you talk about the like your intention behind that?
The intention behind bringing the two together. Yeah. Well, because we're obviously living in the digital era. So I think just to say, no, I'm only gonna release things on 8 tracks and live in my little anti-technology cavern, which I would happily do. That's sort of that's my soul. But I realize that that's not where we are. And I think that seeing the best in both, it's like taking the best of both worlds. And there is something obviously wonderful that, technology can do to facilitate a feeling of magic. Throughout each of the projects, technology was the invisible facilitator of this feeling of magic. So you take a theatre for the palm of the hand, which looks like an 80s Viewmaster, so it's nostalgic, it's familiar, but then, it actually is this way of watching this 3D holographic kind of interactive experience. Or you take an old coin-operated viewport, which we all know to look out to see, and that's actually a converted AR headset, and you can watch the album come to life, around you. So I definitely love that blend of old and new, but really using the best bits. I think we can also do the opposite and use the worst bits, and I think NFTs are an example of using the worst bits on both. But I think From Green to Red, it was just very much like, I don't know, I wasn't really aware. I didn't have so much of that usual project mentality, which usually has a lot more elements, and it usually has a historic space like the Bell Labs Anechoic Chamber or 34 Montague Square, which kind of gives it this whole history and context. This, in many ways, was much more digital than some of the previous work. But I think when it is installed and you have that feeling of being able to, move your hand over the fabric and pull out that data, it has a real tangibility to it. And obviously, as you mentioned, it's, the data is, historic, so that is a factor of it. So yeah, I definitely think that, we've got to take the best bits of whatever we can.
Well, so we've got a short video from one of your recent projects, the Raw Space. That's a great example of this. And so, Nick, can we play that?
The place, a hilltop in New Jersey. The setting, giant antennas like monstrous eyes and ears, straining, watching, waiting.
And now, 50 years on, this historic horn will be used for the first time to beam music into space. My latest record, Raw Space. Should we do it together? 1, 2, 3.
So here we are, we're in front of the Homdill horn antenna, which was used to prove the validity of the Big Bang Theory. Won the scientists a Nobel Prize. What's so exciting about Raw Space is not only will we be creating the first fully augmented reality 360 album stream, but we'll also be the first to beam an album into space via this horn antenna.
Today they are looking, as all humanity looks, to the vast potentials of outer space.
At first, I was perplexed how to do something like this, but as I thought about it, I started having ideas. We all know radio. If we could modulate the sound on a microwave carrier, it could go through the horn and go up into space.
So what do we have here? It's a fancy radio that shows what we're transmitting. And if you look at the screen, there's this big spike, and that's the radio signal that's carrying your music. Oh, we can listen?
Here we are, 1, 2, 3.
And so when we turn the antenna up, that signal will be the one heading up into space.
Okay, well, should we do that now?
Yes.
Yes.
Do it.
But, it's amazing how when things are made well, they last.
Just like music, folks.
So this is the end of the horn where we can connect to either a signal source or a receiver. Right now, we have a radiator in there that can radiate microwaves and a speaker, which can broadcast sound. It comes out of this horn up to the surface up there, which is a piece of a paraboloid, sort of like a little piece of the reflector of your flashlight or something. Then it makes it into a signal that's going pretty much in one direction, into space.
Well, maybe at this hour, it will go past the planet Venus on its way out of the solar system.
I love creating worlds for each of my albums, and sending this one into space makes it truly universal. Well, I guess it's time to start the broadcast.
Okay.
Should we do it together? 1, 2, 3.
Hello, this is Beatie Wolfe, and this is the Raw Space.
Yeah!
Multiverse broadcast, coming to you from the rawest recording space on the planet and transmitting into the rawest space outside the planet.
I think I heard somebody say very cool, which is exactly how I feel about that. So at this point, I think we're going to turn to some questions from the audience, which I have populated here on the screen in front of me. Lots of good questions that have come in. Here's one I'll start with. For decades, efforts to address climate change have been obstructed by disinformation and propaganda, which are only getting more powerful and polarizing in this age of social media. What do you think it might take to cut through that noise? What empowers art, music, and protest to foster awakenings?
Well, if I could send all social media and put it on a rocket and send it into space and have it explode, that would be pretty fantastic. Although I don't like sending physical. The nice thing about that, I will just say, is it was obviously a microwave signal. I don't like sending all this. We shouldn't be sending stuff into space. I've set a bad example. No, I think. I don't know. I think it's got incredibly divisive, and I think we're all in our little echo chambers. And, social media has been a huge player in that. So I feel like, it's the pendulum thing, and it's almost like if you take the analogy of, say, of music, and the fact that we now have so much noise, so much access to anything we want whenever we want. You could apply that to pretty much anything. We have everything at our fingertips, but we have no value, and we have no sense of where that's coming from or the costs of that. Technology's done a fabulous job of fast-tracking everything it means to be human beings on the planet, but without reflecting the true costs in the process, which is kind of why we are where we are. So I feel like there's going to have to be a lot more of that being factored in going forward. And I think also people, once something gets so extreme, usually the pendulum swings the other way. So in that way, I do have hope, and I think that people are waking up, and I think it's a slow burn, but as you mentioned, with all the fires and the droughts and these extreme conditions, we are actually now, it's no longer over there, it's here, and when something is here on our doorstep, we have to start paying attention to it.
Yeah, when I started out reporting on climate change, I wrote a lot about polar bears because that was how we could physically tell the story of climate change, and it's gotten a lot closer to home lately. So someone asks, was there one record which made a bigger impact than any other? And I don't know if they mean of yours or that you have heard or that you saw growing up, and I'll let you interpret that as you wish.
Interesting. Well, there was one album that made me want to make an album in the first place. I was 8. It was Blood, Sugar, Sex, Magic by the Chili Peppers, and I heard it in this little fisherman village in Portugal where my mum now lives. And it was sung to me by, we were staying above a bar, a very rowdy, like pretty crazy bar, and I was obviously a kid, and the bartender would sing Suck My Kiss to me each. Now that sounds really terrible.
Kind of cringy, yeah.
But at the time it was so cool, you know, and it wasn't like that. It was just like, you know, and I just thought, wow, man, you know, it was raw, it had that energy, and so yeah, it totally shook my little world right up. And my mom banned me. She was like, you cannot, when you get back to London, you cannot get that record. And I got a friend's brother to buy it for me and hid it in my room and played it and transcribed, wrote out every line of the album, even though there were lyrics. So I don't know why I didn't just read but I can now, I have the whole album memorized. I know every word of that record. Sabrina, if you want to test me.
Excellent, because there's going to be a quiz tonight. That's the next segment of this talk.
Yeah, but that thing of it imprinting, it imprinted so deeply, and that a sense of, you know, you couldn't skip a track, you know, all those things that we've obviously again lost because of the digitalization, you know, really telling a story, really going on a journey, and yeah, it made me fall in love with albums.
That's great. If you were to reinterpret that question as what's one record that you've made that had the biggest impact, what would you say?
I think Raw Space, just because it was this, you know, the anti-stream aspect of it, which, you know, sometimes the work is so complicated because it's so layered that they are all very long stories, you know, when you start really telling people about the whole kind of aspect of it. But yeah, us doing this anti-stream, which was my, you know, the antithesis of our streaming culture, that was the intention, to create that from this room where Helen Keller experienced silence and rogue frequencies she experienced silence for the first time. That was the actual, not just she experienced silence. And all these amazing audio discoveries had been made, and it was a room where so many people would go, you kind of get a bit crazy because, you know, you can hear the blood rushing through your veins, and the engineers would have to leave at 20-minute intervals just so they wouldn't get freaked out. And I just fell in love with this room and spent now over 100 hours in there and realized just how noisy the world is, you know, and how sacred silence is, and, you know, the silence within everything that we do. The more we can cultivate, just like the presence and the ceremony, the silence. And so creating this anti-stream from that amazing room, you know, with the physical record player, playing the album on repeat 24 hours for a week, and then people could log in and, you know, they could hear the record in this pure focused way, but then the lyrics would be streaming out of the vinyl, the artwork would be surrounding you and taking you into this Fantasia experience. That was so magical for me, and that was the closest thing to what I had in my mind opening up Abbey Road as a 7-year-old, and it all coming to life around me. So that was obviously the first part, and then doing the space broadcast with Robert Wilson, which was a total whimsical experiment. It was never, I had no idea that was ever going to happen. He and I just got chatting, and we'd met at the Horn Antenna, and I was so fascinated with it. And I said to him, you know, you've used it to receive, but have you ever used it to transmit? And he's like, well, no. And I'm like, oh, I have this album called Raw Space, you know, that I've just done at Bell Labs. Like, maybe we could send it into space. And he's like, no, because the sound waves will get to a point in the Earth's atmosphere and then they'll stop. And I thought that was the end of the conversation. And then a month later, I get an email from him saying, hey, Beatie, I figured it out. You know, I can do an update on the horn and we can do this broadcast. And this is like a National Historic Landmark. And there was no reason to do it, you know. And that, for me, was just, it was so wonderful. And it was such a lovely sort of second chapter to the story, to this story of raw space. And then that ended up, you know, going to JPL and giving the talk and then showing that video and finding out, I didn't actually realize, but my grandfather had worked in the field of telemetry, you know, at JPL on the Discoverer and the Explorer, and no one in my family, that had been kind of secret. So I ended up at JPL where my grandfather had been, having never realized that until I was there. And it sort of connected all these other wonderful threads of, you know, how experiments in art and technology at Bell Labs began with Warhol and Cage and Rauschenberg. And Warhol had seen this Mylar balloon that you saw in that video, which was actually used to bounce the first phone call off space sent from JPL, received at Bell Labs. Warhol had seen that and asked them to build him these Mylar balloons, and that began this program, which I then rebooted 50 years later with Raw Space. And so it was all connected, and sort of seeing the interconnection within even that project alone. And I see that within a lot of the projects. It's so magical, and you realize kind of the serendipity and, you know, following your instincts and following what you're passionate about. And if you're passionate about it, it's quite likely that maybe someone else will get passionate about it too. And, you know, it leads you to the most, all the projects have been detours. None of them were ever part of what I was doing at that point in time. And so I think in life, detours are the best part of life, really.
Hear, hear. Someone asked, and I'm also dying to know this, do you know where in space the raw space is?
Well, the last time I checked in with my pals up there, no, with Robert Wilson, it was halfway on its way to Proxima Centauri, but that was 2 years ago. So it's because it was broadcast 4 years ago, and so I found out that just before the Barbican night. And so now I guess it's there. If it was halfway there 2 years ago, I guess it's there now.
Presumably, yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. So can you, one person wants to know, tell us about your next projects, and do they include environmental exploration?
Yeah, they do. I mean, there are a number of, you know, so right now, the kind of main three, I guess, you know, there was a record installation that was actually going to be at the Art Institute of Chicago, and then COVID hit, and that was paying tribute to Hedy Lamarr. So it was a way of creating an album experience as a sort of secret communication system using code pioneered by Hedy Lamarr in World War II, frequency hopping code, to sort of have this feeling that you're walking around an old radio discovering these secret channels. And that was all mapped out. I'd figured that out. You saw a little bit at the end of one of the videos of me chalking the project out in LA on some park. And so, yeah, it was all ready to go, and then obviously COVID. So that's one that is being reignited and still active. The other one is actually in the similar sort of science vein. I've been working with particle physicists from CERN, me and another musician, Mark Mothersbaugh of the band Devo. We've been chatting with these particle physicists and seeing
as
if
one
we
does.
as one does, mind-blowing stuff, actually stuff that makes your mind hurt, you know, and because it's so micro, it's on the other end of the scale, and figuring out if we can translate what they're doing into a sonic piece. So working on that currently. And then very much in the eco art space, I've been doing these micro documentaries, kind of looking at initiatives that are, I think, very important, but maybe a lot of people don't know about, and are closer to home, you know, are more kind of hidden in plain sight. And one of them is actually about reclaiming urban wood. So the guitar over there is made out of reclaimed urban wood that would be typically turned into tinder and burnt, and obviously then all the carbon is released back into the atmosphere. And so it's this initiative. I've been working with CAL FIRE and West Coast Arborists and Taylor to sort of tell the story of this initiative, which is about planting the right tree in the right area and then really having a design for it at the end of its life cycle. So it becomes part of a building, it becomes a guitar, it's not burnt as typically would happen. And then the second part of this, or the second story which I'm working on now, is with Noah, really sort of celebrating this initiative and telling the story of this initiative to rewild the West Coast aquaculture, because, and I'm sure people here know, but 95% of the kelp forests have disappeared, in the last 10, 15 years. And obviously all of the inhabitants of the kelp forest, so the abalone and all the other critters. And this is a rewilding initiative that NOAA is doing from farm to ocean. So we've been telling that story, and obviously that also connects with the guitar because the abalone is used for guitar inlays amongst, many other things. And I think, with these, there's one more, but it's that idea of where art and nature kind of meet, and hopefully opening up, the awareness around something that maybe might seem a little, I don't know, not dry, but just removed, and doing that through the vehicle of the guitar.
Well, unfortunately, I believe that's about all we have time for tonight in terms of questions. Sorry to say, but Beady, thank you so much for your time and for letting us take a peek into the worlds you're creating. So at this point, we're going to say goodnight to our virtual audience now. Again, thank you for tuning in, and we hope you can check out more of Beady's work in the future and come back for future museum programming.